Today is brought to you by the word lighting. It's all tough. Hey friends, it's your good friend Tim Campbell-Smith, and today we are talking about the different types of social work that you can do. And today I really use social work as two separate words where we describe the work of social workers. Social work. Now it's feeling like a weird philosophical approach. I mean the work of social work. If you want to get into social work, maybe you're unsure what kind of social work you might do or the types of social work jobs, this video is for you. We're going to break down the levels of social work that one may do, the kinds of social work, and where social workers work based on those different levels, which is a common approach to social work. Before we go too far, make sure you like and subscribe for all things mental health, career, business, school and life. So we tend to look at social work and we tend to look at social work jobs in terms of level. Micro, meso, and macro. If you haven't started in social work, you're gonna learn these words inside and out. And if you have, I'm hoping that I'm not giving you horrific flashbacks. Micro social work works with individuals, maybe small groups, families, that kind of thing. Direct work. Meso social work blends macro and micro in that you're gonna work with individuals, but you're also working with institutions, with organizations, companies. So you kind of have like accountability or responsibility to multiple parties. So meso is a little bit high level, it's a little bit in the weeds and individual. And then you have macro social work. So this is working with organizations, policymakers, people who influence others. And this then helps us organize jobs. So let's get into it. So micro social work involves working with individuals or very small groups. So the most obvious example that we see here is therapy and like private practice. Sometimes group practices are being part of other practices where you're providing therapy, either individual therapy, couples counseling, family therapy. An interesting place where you may be corporate employed, and I was recently learning about this from other social workers, is in corporate settings supporting employees. So working on like an employee assistance program or being like a wellness coordinator or a wellness consultant within an organization. So those are pretty typical, the therapeutic route, but you may also in micro social work go to individual supports and working in individual support systems. So supportive services, an obvious one is housing. So when people need housing, so this might be working with people experiencing homelessness, people experiencing near homelessness, newcomers to a country who need housing. But then there may be other services like food banks, crisis shelters, and immediate like crisis support, like supportive housing. Crisis and disaster relief often is very micro and working with individuals or again, small groups of people. I'm actually going to jump to macro social work because meso is so in the middle. Let's jump to macro social work. Macro social work, remember, involves working with others who influence others, working with groups, working with people who influence others. So a lot of macro social work involves research. So you gotta be curious, you gotta be interested in writing and investigations and especially like research methodology if you're doing primary research. In social work, you are trained to do both. Every social work program, at least in Ontario that I've ever seen, they all have courses where you do qualitative and quantitative studies in research. So you're able and equipped to do so. But also, especially with social work, when it comes to macro, if you are doing primary research and you're talking to people about the different ways that like policies or rules or laws might affect them, those are going to be tough conversations. Social workers are uniquely equipped and trained to have those difficult conversations. So that's a cool area for social workers to be in. This involves a lot of report writing, a lot of like consultation and consulting with decision makers as well. So jobs in macro social work would look like working in government ministries, working in government organizations, maybe some not-for-profits, research and in academia. So especially if you're interested in like a PhD, you're more likely to be doing at least some work in macro social work. This might involve lobbying, so going to governments, going to government officials, and pressuring them one way or another to, to do something. Or working in administration. Cool feedback I got when I was doing informational interviews with social workers was that a social work degree, either bachelor's, master's, both, equips you to do so many different jobs. It is one degree with a million different career prospects. And one big one is actually management and working in administration. Because if you understand people, if you understand what affects people and how to lead or organize, groups and teams and people, you're going to do well in administration, which is technically like macro level social work. The other thing you may be a part of is like think tanks. So this is kind of a mix of like research and academia and not-for-profits and sometimes government. And basically think tanks are usually independent organizations that are trying to solve a problem. So they may go like, why are newcomers from India to Canada not able to access food the same way other newcomers are? So you might have a think tank trying to tackle access to food for a specific population in a specific area, and they're just trying to solve that one problem. So you might be part of a think tank. And that is macro social work. So then we have meso level social work, which is in between macro and micro. Again, meso involving a little bit of like one-on-one and support work with individuals, with small groups, but also then when you're accountable and working with organizations. When I was looking at the type of jobs involved in meso social work, I thought of they all sounded like community settings where you have a responsibility to help people, but you are also answerable or responsible to management and higher ups and to others to make sure that people are getting the care they need and that changes are happening. So classic examples were working in hospitals, working in schools, working with administration and management, either in a business role or a non-business role. Working in community and resource mobilization. Now, normally I hate those terms. They are so high level. They are so fancy speak. Community and resource mobilization is really just a fancy way of saying that the people who need certain goods or services get those needs or services, and everybody who knows how to get them the goods and services can get them the goods and services. So an example, a hypothetical example of resource mobilization, you may notice let's take a huge city like Toronto, you may notice people experiencing homelessness in the west end of Toronto are dying more often of frigid temperatures than people experiencing homelessness in the north end of Toronto. And you notice, that's because in the north end, there are more tents being given out, there are more shelters, there are more resources. So then, social workers will be part of, solving that and going, okay, we need to get more tents, we need to get more warm spaces from the north end to the west end so that less people experiencing homelessness actually die because of the elements. So we're literally taking whatever resources, products or services, and getting them to the people who need it. Two other classic examples of meso-social work would be working in corrections and working in addictions. Corrections, frankly, in Canada is a hot mess. Many people argue that the point of corrections is actually to rehabilitate someone to be able to be a part of society without causing harm or concern to others. So social workers may be, when they uphold that vision and that belief, may work with incarcerated persons to build social skills and to build psychosocial skills and emotional literacy so that they can handle themselves, be their best selves, so that when they're out in society, when they're no longer incarcerated, they can be a healthy, active, regular functioning member of society. So you're working with the individuals, but you're also meeting like program outcomes and program requirements of that facility. The same principle actually applies to addictions. You're providing like addiction support and counseling and whatever the person needs who's experiencing addiction or has experienced addiction, but you also are trying to meet goals from different community organizations, from management, from policymakers. And this also depends on, especially with addictions, is it inpatient or outpatient? Inpatient being like you are full-time in a supportive setting, maybe like a hospital or like an addiction center, or is it outpatient where you just like go and visit for that support? And that's meso-social work, where you're working with both individuals, small groups, groups, but then you're also accountable to and involving larger organizations. So you have your 3 levels, micro, meso, and macro. Micro working with just like individual small groups. Meso being kind of in between. So you work with individuals and small groups, but you also work with organizations and you're accountable to them. Or macro social work. You work with people and organizations that are influencing others. Here's some guiding questions. If you're still, you've heard all this, you've heard these different settings, and you're still not quite sure what kind of social work you want to do, here's a few guiding questions. 1, how many people do you want to work with at a time and in a day? If you only want to work with like 1 person at a time or not many people at any given time, most forms of micro social work would be for you. Some forms of macro social work would also be for you. Research is very lonely and a very isolating thing to do. So if you like being alone, you're very curious, you like writing, then macro. And in the other question, in trying to figure out like how many people you want to work with, also ask yourself, who do you want to work with? Do you want to work with a population directly? Like, do you want to work with a group of people directly? Do you want to work with people who influence them? Think about who you want to work with as well in that mix. Next, where do you want to be making an impact? Do you want to make an impact with individual people? Do you feel more fulfillment, more joy working with them one-on-one? Or do you feel more fulfilled knowing that your ideas, your concepts, your research, or whatever impacts a large group of people at one time? The former being micro social work, the latter being macro, bit of meso. Next question, who do you want to report to? Do you want to be responsible to your client? Do you want to be accountable to a team? Do you want to be accountable to a group of policymakers? Who do you want to be accountable to and work directly with? That will also decide the level of social work. Those are the different levels of social work that you can do. Micro with individuals, meso in between, so some individuals, some small groups, and communities or organizations, and then macro, where you work with folks who influence others. The other big thing I want to say about this, to wrap this all up, is that remember, when you're going into this career, when you're thinking about this career, a social work degree, bachelor's, master's, is very transferable. Whatever you decide to do now doesn't have to be forever. In fact, when I was looking into going into social work and I was doing informational interviews with social workers, one social worker actually gave me a professional tip where she said, change your focus every 5 years. So if you're in private practice as a therapist, that might mean like, okay, go from focusing on youth to working with older adults. If it's working with individuals, go to couples. Or change entirely. So do private practice therapy for 7 years and then go work in a hospital for 5 and then go work at a government agency for 10 and then go, right, switch it around. Nothing you do has to be permanent. Comment and let me know, what areas of social work interest you, or where have other places that you've heard of social workers working? As always, make sure to like and subscribe for all things business, careers, photography, mental health, and life. Otherwise, we'll chat soon. Bye for now.